September 19, 1940. Żelazna Street, central Warsaw. Morning rush hour. German trucks block both ends of the avenue. SS men with rifles work down the queue of frozen pedestrians, separating men from women, the young from the old. Nobody is allowed to leave. Behind the cordon, a 39-year-old man in a grey wool overcoat walks toward the soldiers instead of away from them. He has spent 6 days waiting for this exact roundup to begin. 3 days from now, in the reception block of a camp the world has barely heard of, the number 4859 will be tattooed onto his left forearm. He will wear that number for 947 days. He is the first and last man in history who chose to walk into Auschwitz on purpose. What kind of man volunteers for the worst place in Europe? And what does he hope to find that nobody else has the stomach to look for? His name is Witold Pilecki, Polish cavalry officer of the reserve, lieutenant, 39 years old. Before the war, he managed a small estate at Sukoce, in the eastern marches near Lida, painted icons for the parish church on the hill, and trained reservist horsemen in the meadow behind his barn. He has a wife named Maria. He has a son and a daughter, 8 years old and 7. He has the kind of face that looks tired in photographs, even when he is smiling. But the thing he is quietly best at, the thing nobody photographs, is more useful in occupied Poland in 1940 than horsemanship. He builds networks. He listens. He notices which men can keep a secret and which cannot. 6 months ago, in occupied Warsaw, he and a major named Jan Włodarkiewicz founded an underground army from nothing, from kitchen tables, from church basements, from apartments where the cigarette smoke had been deliberately blown into the curtains so the rooms always smelled like a family that had been there an hour before. They called it the Tajna Armia Polska, the secret Polish army. By summer, the network had cells in 5 cities. For weeks, the underground has been hearing the same rumor again and again. The Germans are building something near a railway junction in Upper Silesia. A camp, bigger than anything they have built before. The Polish name for the town is Oswięcim. The Germans are calling it Auschwitz. The reports coming back are contradictory. A labor camp, a quarantine site, a holding pen for Polish officers, a place for political enemies of the Reich. Nobody knows for certain. The few prisoners transferred out come back in pieces and are not allowed to speak. Witold Pilecki proposed, at a meeting in a Warsaw apartment in August, that someone should go inside on purpose, to find out, to build a resistance cell from the inside, to smuggle reports back out. The major across the table thought he was joking. When he realized Pilecki was not, he refused. Then he agreed. Then he tried to talk him out of it again. Then he gave him a set of identity papers in the name of Tomasz Serafiński, a real Polish officer hiding under another name in the south of the country, who never knew his identity had been borrowed. Pilecki folded the papers into his leather wallet on the morning of September 13th. By the time the SS rolled their trucks into Żelazna Street 6 days later, the wallet was sitting in his coat pocket the way a coin sits in a child's palm before he throws it into a fountain. The corporal at the cordon checks his papers. Tomasz Serafiński. The corporal looks up. The man in front of him is calm in a way that registers as either innocence or a different problem. The corporal does not have time for either. He waves Pilecki toward the second truck. Inside, 50 other men are crammed onto the wooden benches. Some are weeping. Some are arguing quietly about whether to make a break for it the moment the truck slows. A young man with broken glasses is repeating his wife's name under his breath. Pilecki sits on the end of the bench nearest the tailgate and does the one thing he has trained himself to do for a year and a half of occupation. He looks at faces. He memorizes them. He picks out the men who keep their heads up and the ones who keep their heads down. He notes which ones have rough hands and which ones have soft. By the time the truck doors slam, he has identified the 4 men he will approach first, once the camp swallows them. For 3 days, the transport rolls south. No water for the first 15 hours. 1 bucket for 200 men. A man dies in the corner of the wagon on the second night, pressed against the slats while he slept. Pilecki holds his eyes closed against the cold air leaking through the boards and thinks about his wife. He thinks about Maria's last sentence to him, said 2 weeks ago in a kitchen in central Poland, where she was hiding with the children. "If I do not come back, do not look for me, pray for me." He had said this himself, into her hair, with his hands on the back of her neck. She had not cried. She had told him to come back. On the night of September 22nd, the transport halts. The men hear dogs first, then floodlights, then shouting in a German they do not understand. Then a single voice, in stilted Polish, telling them to step down from the truck slowly, with their hands behind their heads. A man named Karl Fritsch, SS Hauptsturmführer, deputy commandant of the new camp, will deliver a speech in the courtyard 10 minutes from now. By some accounts, the line that follows is Fritsch's. By others, the commandant Rudolf Höss claimed it first in his post-war memoir. The sentence itself is documented from a dozen survivor testimonies. "You have come not to a sanatorium, but to a German concentration camp. The only way out is through the chimney." Witold Pilecki steps off the truck. The cold air smells of pine resin and something acrid he does not yet have a word for. Ash, perhaps. He does not have time to wonder. A boot strikes him in the small of the back, and he is running through the gate. But before the number 4859 is burned into his forearm, before the gate closes behind him, the story has to walk back. To a defeated country in 1939. To a horseman with a barn full of cavalry saddles and no army left to put on them. To the cold autumn when a quiet officer from Sukurza first understood what kind of war this was going to be. To find the man who walks into the German truck on Żelazna Street, the camera has to roll backwards. To September 1939. To a meadow outside Volkowisk, where a Polish reservist named Witold Pilecki, lieutenant of cavalry, is digging a grave for his own horse. The first week of the September campaign has gone the way every Polish officer feared it would. Stukas roll low over the wheat. Panzer columns punch through positions that should have held until October. By the 3rd day, his squadron is fighting on foot, with their rifles propped against a brewery wall in a town nobody outside the eastern marches has ever heard of. By the 4th day, half the squadron is dead. By the 6th, the chestnut mare named Biker, which Pilecki has owned for 11 years, takes a piece of shrapnel through the lung. He walks her into a clearing. He brushes her one last time. Then he shoots her in the white spot between the eyes. He buries his own service pistol with her because the war is over and because he does not yet know what kind of war is starting. When the Soviet army crosses Poland's eastern border on September 17th, the squadron breaks apart. Some men try to reach Romania. Some try Hungary. Pilecki turns west. By foot, then by goods train, then by foot again, he reaches Warsaw 3 weeks after the last shot of the September campaign is fired. The city under German occupation does not look like a city he recognizes. Loudspeakers on lampposts, posters offering bread for denunciations, the trams running on time, the kind of normalcy that arrives on top of a slaughter and pretends it was always there. He goes home first, or what is left of home. Sukurza, his estate near Lida, sits in the part of Poland the Soviet army has just taken. By the time Pilecki crosses the new border on forged papers in November, the manor house has been looted, The icons he painted have been kicked off the walls. The barn has been emptied of cavalry tack and refilled with NKVD officers. His wife Maria and the 2 children are safe. She had moved them to her family the week the war began, but the estate is gone and the family will never see Sukurcha again. He stands on the soil for a long minute. Then he turns the cart around and rides back to Warsaw. In the months that follow, the underground crystallizes around kitchen tables. Pilecki and a major named Jan Wlodarkiewicz meet for the first time in a borrowed apartment in November 1939. They share cigarettes that nobody can afford and an idea that nobody else is yet willing to say aloud. Poland is not finished. Poland is going underground. They found the Tajna Armia Polska, the secret Polish army, on the second day of conversation. They write the founding declaration on a single sheet of paper, sign it with their own names, and burn it in the stove before the ink has dried. Within 6 months, the network has cells in Warsaw, Kraków, Lwów, Lublin, and Łódź. They train new recruits in physical education clubs and in church basements. They print bulletins on a duplicator hidden behind a wardrobe in a Praga tenement. They map the locations of Wehrmacht ammunition dumps and the houses of Polish informers. They wait. They listen. And every few weeks, a new rumor drifts in from the south. The rumor is about a town called Oświęcim, 40 kilometers west of Kraków. A pre-war Polish artillery barracks the Germans have requisitioned and ringed with new fencing. Transports begin arriving there in June 1940. Men go in. Men do not come out. The handful of prisoners released early stagger into Warsaw, bearing instructions they have been told to memorize and never write down. The instructions describe a place that does not match anything the underground has prepared its people for. The Polish word for what is rumored to be happening behind that fence has not yet been invented. The August meeting takes place in an apartment above a tailor's shop on Marszałkowska Street. 3 men, a samovar on the windowsill, Wlodarkiewicz, Pilecki, and a 3rd officer whose name the records still spell differently in different sources. Pilecki places his hands flat on the table and proposes the following. Someone has to go in, not as a spy parachuting from a closed sky, as a prisoner. Someone has to allow the Germans to arrest him at the next Lapanka, the next street roundup, and to be transported to this place at Oświęcim. From the inside, that someone is to build a resistance cell. Recruit prisoners. Map the layout, the guards, the rota. Find a way to smuggle reports back out. And when the moment is right, organize an uprising from within the wire. Wlodarkiewicz stares at him. Pilecki does not blink. Wlodarkiewicz says no. Then he asks how. Then he says no again, more quietly. Then he asks who would do such a thing. Pilecki gestures at himself. For 3 weeks, the major refuses. He brings other officers into the apartment to argue against the plan. They argue against the plan. Pilecki listens. He does not raise his voice once. By the 2nd week of September, Wlodarkiewicz has run out of arguments. He hands Pilecki a leather wallet containing identity papers in the name of a Polish officer named Tomasz Serafiński, papers borrowed without the owner's knowledge from a home army cell in the south. He hands Pilecki a second item, a small glass ampule the size of a thumbnail, sealed in wax, which he does not name. Pilecki understands what it is and slips it into the lining of his coat without comment. If the Gestapo catches him with a Polish officer's underground papers and starts asking how he came by them, the ampule will end the conversation. He has 6 days to prepare. He spends them visiting families of men already arrested, walking past the addresses he has memorized, so the addresses will follow him into the camp. If you are following this story so far, The channel runs on stories like this one. Subscribe if you would like more walking through your evenings. Now, the morning of September 19th, 6 in the morning. Pilecki leaves his rented room above a bakery on Senatorska Street. He goes to Mass at the parish church on Mokotowska, kneels at the back, and stays through the second reading. He does not light a candle. He does not write a letter home. He has done that already, 2 weeks ago, in a kitchen in central Poland, with his hands on the back of Maria's neck. Then he walks 2 streets to Żelazna and steps into the queue of pedestrians the Germans have just begun rounding up. There is no waving goodbye. There is no last look. There is only a man putting himself on a wooden bench in a German truck because he has decided that someone has to be the first to look. The corporal at the cordon waves him to the second truck. He climbs in. He looks at faces. He memorizes 4 of them in particular. But who builds an underground army inside a place that exists to grind men into smoke? And once the reports start reaching Warsaw, what will the rest of the war do with them? The gate at Auschwitz is the kind of gate that looks like a joke until you stand under it. Black iron letters spelling Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. Above the letters, a guard in a watchtower with a machine pistol resting on the rail. The men from the Warsaw transport are pushed through the gate at a half run, beaten into a courtyard, and lined up in rows of 5. A Polish-speaking SS man, a Volksdeutscher named Bruno, walks the line and tells them what the deputy commandant told him to tell them. Forget your name. Forget your address. Forget the country you come from. From this moment, you are a number. The only way out is through the chimney. Witold Pilecki receives the number 4859 in the reception block. A prisoner with a tattooing needle, hands shaking, scratches the digits into his left forearm just below the elbow. Pilecki does not flinch. He files the digits away the way he files the 4 faces from the truck. He will need both later. The first 3 weeks in the camp are designed to break the men who arrive. Roll calls at 4 in the morning in any weather. 2 slices of black bread and a litre of brown soup a day. Beatings at random. Killings at random. A prisoner named Marian, in the bunk across from Pilecki, is shot for being slow to remove his cap as an SS sergeant walks past. The bunk fills with someone else by evening. Dozens of men from the September 19th transport are dead by the middle of October. Pilecki does what he came to do. He listens. He memorizes. He picks out the men who keep their eyes up and the men who keep their eyes down. The men whose hands shake at roll call and the men whose hands stop shaking after the second beating. By the end of the first month, he has approached 3. By the end of the second month, 11. He builds his network the way the Tajna Armia Polska was built in Warsaw, in cells of 5. Each man knows the 4 others in his cell and nobody else. If one cell breaks under interrogation, the next one survives. He calls it ZOW, the Union of Military Organization. Within a year, it will reach into the camp kitchens, the camp hospital, the laundry, the carpentry shop, the survey office, and the disinfection block. Sources later disagree on the peak size. Some put it at 500 sworn members, others at over 1,000. Once the network has eyes and hands, Pilecki begins to send out the thing he came in to send out: the reports. Cigarette-thin paper, microscopic handwriting, sewn into the lining of laundry sacks, hidden in the false bottoms of soup pails. Smuggled out by prisoners released on technicalities or by civilian labourers who walk in and out under the SS noses every day. The first report leaves the wire in October 1940. It reaches the Home Army headquarters in Warsaw within a month. From Warsaw, it goes by courier to Stockholm, by courier from Stockholm to London, by London to Washington. The exact count of how many reports Pilecki sent out across his time in the camp is contested. The documents that survived the war disagree on whether the total is 12 or 20 or more. What is not contested is what the reports said. They named the camp commandant. They named the deputy. They counted the transports. They described the gas chambers from the day the first ones came online. And they begged, in 3 different reports, for the same thing: an Allied air raid, an airborne uprising from outside the wire, anything. Nothing comes back. The reports reach the desk of General Władysław Sikorski. They are read in London, in Washington, in the Vatican. They are believed. They are filed. The men who file them do not yet have a name for what is being described. Pilecki keeps writing. He watches things from inside that the men who read his reports in London cannot. On the 14th of August, 1941, he stands in a courtyard while a starved Franciscan friar named Maximilian Kolbe steps out of the line and asks the deputy commandant to be killed in place of a younger prisoner who has been chosen for the starvation bunker. The deputy commandant shrugs and agrees. Kolbe walks into the bunker, singing the litany to the Virgin. He takes 2 weeks to die. Pilecki does not write about Kolbe in his report. He writes about the policy that produced Kolbe. The first cell of his network was already half built by then. By the end of 1941, his men have begun stealing penicillin from the camp pharmacy and feeding the dying. In the summer of 1942, typhus moves through the camp like a tide. Pilecki catches it in July. He spends 2 weeks in the prisoner hospital, so feverish he cannot remember Maria's name. A prisoner doctor named Władysław Deering, also a ZOE member, keeps him alive on a thin gruel and on the kind of nursing that breaks every German hospital regulation. When Pilecki walks out of the hospital in August, the camp has grown a second site 3 kilometers west, a place the Germans call Birkenau, and trains have begun arriving there directly from Hungary, from France, from Greece, full of people who never even see the inside of the main camp. They walk straight off the ramp into a forest where wooden farmhouses have been refitted with sealed doors. By the spring of 1943, 2 things have changed inside the wire. One is that Pilecki has finished planning an uprising from the inside. He has the men. He has the layout. He has the timing. He has signaled the Home Army in Warsaw to drop weapons and to time an outside attack with his inside revolt. The Home Army declines. They write back, through the courier network Pilecki built, that the math does not work. Even with a successful inside revolt, the SS divisions stationed around Auschwitz can be on the camp within 40 minutes. The casualties would be total. Wait, the other thing that has changed is that the Gestapo has begun pulling on a thread. 3 ZOW men disappear into the punishment block in February. 2 more in March. One of them, an engineer named Władysław Somacki, dies in interrogation. Somacki did not know Pilecki's real name, but he knew 6 men who did. By Easter 1943, Pilecki understands that the report he has been writing for 945 days is going to need to walk out of the camp on its own legs, inside his head, because his own days are now numbered in weeks. He gets himself reassigned to the camp bakery. The bakery is one of the few work details that works outside the main fence, in a brick building on the road toward the village. It runs through Saturday night to bake bread for Sunday morning. The night shift is 3 men. The door of the bakery, made of oak banded in iron, locks from the inside. Pilecki memorizes the lock. He clocks the schedule of the SS overseer who comes to count loaves at 3 in the morning. He notes which clothes the civilian baker hangs on a peg by the back door before going home for the night. He marks the telephone wire that runs from the bakery to the SS guardhouse. He arranges, through ZOW, for 2 other men to join him on the same shift. Their names are Jan Redzej and Edward Ciesielski. Both have been sworn for over a year. Both have been waiting. The shift falls on the night of April 26, 1943, Easter Monday. Bread for the SS canteen the next morning. The 3 men report to the bakery at 10 in the evening. How does a man who has spent 947 days inside the worst place in Europe walk out of it through an oak door on Easter night? And once he is on the road to Warsaw, with a report nobody on the outside has been willing to act on, what does he do when he discovers that nobody on the outside is going to act on it now either? The bakery on the road out of the camp is a brick building 20 meters long and 10 wide. The night smells of yeast and pine resin. At 10 in the evening, the 3 prisoners on the night shift report through the back door and begin the routine. Bake 50 loaves for the SS canteen. Bake another 40 for the Wachmannschaft barracks. Pilecki, Jan Redzej, Edward Ciesielski. 3 numbers tattooed on 3 forearms. 3 men who have decided that the bread they are kneading tonight will be the last bread they ever bake for the Reich. The SS overseer makes his 3 o'clock count and walks back to the guardhouse. The door of the bakery clicks shut behind him. Redzej slides the iron bar across the inside. Ciesielski climbs onto a flour sack and cuts the telephone wire that runs from the wall above the oven out to the guardhouse. Pilecki crosses to the back door, takes a hammer wrapped in cloth, and breaks the lock with 1 short blow. The civilian baker's overcoat is hanging on the peg where it always hangs. Pilecki puts it on. Redzej takes the canvas jacket. Ciesielski takes the trousers and the cap. The 3 of them step out the back door of a building on the road toward the village at 20 minutes past 3 on the morning of April 27, 1943. They run. Across a field, through a fence, across a road that should have an SS patrol on it and somehow does not, through a stand of birch trees, down a ditch beside a stream. Their feet are wet within 5 minutes. They do not stop. By dawn, they have crossed the Soa River using a tree the local resistance has felled beside the ford the week before, though Pilecki only learns this later. By the time the SS guardhouse picks up the telephone at 6 in the morning to ask why the bakery has not phoned in, the 3 men are 16 kilometers east of the wire and lying in long grass behind a barn, while a farmer's wife brings them brown bread and a clay jug of milk. For the next 8 days they walk only at night. They keep off the main roads. They sleep in haylofts, in chapels, in 1 disused railway signal hut. They cover the 150 kilometers to a town called Novi Vishnich in stages of 15 and 20 and 12. On the 8th night, Pilecki knocks on the door of a small manor house and asks for a man named Tomasz Serafiński. The door is opened by Tomasz Serafiński, the real one, the one whose papers Pilecki has been carrying in the lining of his coat for 2.5 years without ever meeting him. Serafiński turns out to be the local commander of the Home Army Detachment for the Bochnia district. He looks at the stranger on his step for a long second, at the prisoner number visible just below the rolled-up sleeve, and then he laughs once and pulls the man inside the house. In the back rooms of the Serafiński manor at Koryznówka that summer, Pilecki writes the longest of the Witold reports. It runs to over 100 typed pages. It names the gas chambers at Birkenau by their construction sequence. It names the commandant. It names the deputy. It names 63 German guards and what each of them did. It begs, one final time, for an Allied air raid on the rail lines. The report is couriered to Warsaw in the autumn, from Warsaw to Stockholm, from Stockholm to London, from London to the desks where his earlier reports had been read before. It is read again, It is filed again. Nothing comes. In August 1944, with the city of Warsaw in ruins and the Red Army standing on the far bank of the Vistula, Pilecki fights in the Warsaw Uprising under the codename Captain Roman. He commands a platoon in the Old Town. The platoon holds a defensive line for 3 weeks under continuous Stuka and tank fire. When the uprising fell on the 2nd of October, he marched into German captivity for the second time in his life. Stalag 8B at Lambsdorff, then Stalag 7A at Murnau in Bavaria. The Americans liberated him in the spring of 1945. He was reassigned to the 2nd Polish Corps in Italy under General Władysław Anders. He was promoted to captain. He could have stayed. The men around him stayed. Anders's corps was offered British resettlement after the war, and tens of thousands of his fellow Polish officers took it. Pilecki turned the offer down. In December 1945, on orders from London, he crossed back into Soviet-occupied Poland with false papers and a tiny network of 3 couriers and 1 radio operator. The country he walked back into was not the country he had walked out of. The Home Army was being hunted by a new police force called the UB, run by Soviet advisors from the NKVD. Former resistance officers were being arrested in their kitchens and shot in basements without trial. Pilecki gathered names, he gathered dates, he gathered addresses. He passed the information to Anders in Italy through the same kind of courier network he had built inside Auschwitz 5 years earlier. He did this for 16 months before the UB found him. They arrested him on the 8th of May, 1947, in a flat in Warsaw. It took them 3 months to figure out who he actually was. What followed in the interrogation cells of Mokotow prison was so methodical and so prolonged that when Pilecki was finally brought into the courtroom in March 1948, his fingernails had been pulled out and his ribs and collarbones had been broken in a sequence so deliberate it had to have been written down somewhere. He could not raise his right arm. Whether he ever held the cyanide ampule between his teeth during those months, no record says. What is recorded is that he chose not to use it. He chose to stand trial. He chose to look at the men reading the charges and say into the microphone of the People's Court that he had served Poland and would do so again given the chance. He chose to say to his wife Maria, in the only visit he was allowed before sentencing, that Auschwitz had been a game compared to this. He was sentenced to death on the 15th of March, 1948. On the 25th of May, in a corridor in the basement of Mokotow prison, an officer named Piotr Śmietański placed the muzzle of a pistol against the back of Witold Pilecki's head and pulled the trigger once. The body was never returned to the family. The grave has never been found. Maria learned of her husband's death from a stranger in the street 3 days after the fact, who walked up to her at a tram stop and said only, "He is gone, pray for him." He could have walked away 3 times. On Żelazna Street in 1940, he could have turned and gone home. After Easter 1943, with the report inside his head and the report inside his pack, he could have crossed into Switzerland the way other AK officers did. In Anders' army in 1945, he could have stayed in Italy and become a British subject by Christmas. Each of those 3 doors stood open. Each time, he walked into the queue instead. Witold Pilecki was rehabilitated by the Polish government in 1990. His prisoner number from Auschwitz, 4859, is engraved on a small plaque in the courtyard of Block 11 at the Auschwitz Museum, alongside the numbers of the other ZOW men he sent in there with him. The report he wrote in the back rooms at Nowy Wiznich was finally published in full in 2012. It remains the only first-hand account of the Auschwitz camp system written by a man who walked into it on purpose. Sometimes the bravest thing a man does is not to escape, but to choose the queue. Sometimes a soldier's last battle is fought not against the enemy he marched into the camp to fight, but against the one his own country puts in his place when the war is over. The number 4859 outlasted both regimes. The man who wore it lasted long enough to make sure of it. If this one stayed with you, there are more on the channel. Subscribe if you would like the next one delivered when it lands.